Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Pete Tigers. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking dry fly fishing, and I'm hoping to pick up some tips from someone I feel is a deep thinking angler. There is much to discuss, and so I'm really pleased to welcome Richard Tong along to the podcast. Richard, lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Great, thanks, Pete, and it's an honour to be invited onto the show. As I mentioned to you, I've listened to it many times in the car on the way to fishing destinations and also on business, so it's kept me company. So I never ever thought I would actually be on it, but there we go.
Well, you know, at the BFFI, I tried to press gang you then, didn't I, to say, come on and speak with me.
Yeah, I was reticent then, and I had a long think about it over the last couple of months, and I thought, well, why not, give it a go.
Fantastic. So tell me, what have you been up to fishing-wise? You been up to much?
I live in Ilkley, West Yorkshire. I've got the wharf a mile from my door. I was out in it last night because I thought it was a half decent night. In the end, it was there was a bit of action. Had some grayling, but no trout about that I could find. The main waters that I go to are based in Cumbria, and they're a good hour and a half away. So I tend to get out at weekends and go for a full day. It's an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back. So if I'm there and the fishing's bad, I'm sort of stuck. I'm not going to just head off back home, which has actually stood me in good stead numerous times. You know, sometimes I've come back and I've barely made a cast, and it's a long day out then. But at other times I've had a slow day, maybe picked up a few fish here and there, and I can think of a handful of occasions where it's just gone absolutely mental. All of a sudden somebody's flicked a switch and flies are just coming off all over the place, and you think, my God, it's like a different river. And I never feel guilty about filling my boots on those occasions. Makes up for all the hard times.
Yeah, they're those special moments. And it was interesting what you said to me about the long drive, and also, you might not make a cast. Does that mean that you will stick to, and we'll come on to your fishing techniques a little bit later, but does that mean you'll stick to your guns and how you're going to fish? You're not ever tempted to say, well, actually, I might try this or I might try that. You're more keen to wait out for those rising fish, are you?
Either wait out or walk. So on a particularly slow day, I might walk miles. I might walk 5 miles, just covering ground on different stretches of the river, looking for feeding fish. The river or rivers that I tend to frequent, I've got a low population of probably larger fish. So I think to quite a greater degree, fishing it with spiders covering the water is going to be counterproductive. The water can get quite low and the fish can easily spot you. So there's a lot of hands and knees jobs and sneaking about, trying to get into position. So yeah, it's low numbers of I guess bigger than average fish compared to if you take the UK averages as being whatever. I'm not sure what that is, but the trout that I'm trying to focus on are a decent size. I've got the wharf, as I say, a mile down the road, so I can hit that in under 2 minutes, and that's got plenty of fish in there if I fancy a bit of just catching trout and grayling, pound and a half type fish, with the occasional bigger one. That's good, and the beauty of that obviously is that if it is not going very well or it's a slow day, I can just pack up and just go back home, which I actually do quite often, especially in spring at lunchtime when I nip out in my lunchtime. If it's good, I'll stay a bit longer. If it's not, I can be back in sort of 10 or 15 minutes, type thing. So yeah, so it works out well. But yeah, very much a case of looking for feeding fish, looking for rising fish, which is not as straightforward as it sounds. Sometimes big fish can make very, very small disturbances. I've been doing it for years and years, so I like to think I've got a certain skill at doing that. But no doubt there are people out there who will outspot me and outfish me. But yeah, it's one of those things that you acquire and get better at over the years.
That's great to hear, and we'll move on to that. You've already got me on the end of the hook at the moment, so I'm excited to hear some more. But talking about those situations where the hatch might suddenly happen or nothing may happen, this year in particular, has that been a difficult and testing one from a weather and condition point of view?
I think the last few years have been, they followed a pattern in that spring has been quite cold. You've had a cold easterly wind. Things have been very slow. And then you suddenly hit April and you've got 6 weeks of sunshine. Now, that didn't happen this year, but it's just been cold the whole way throughout. The fishing that I do, like a lot of people in the spring, does rely on the large dark olives, the iron blues, the March browns. Were lucky enough to get up here as well. So they all appeared a bit later than usual. But on the rivers that I tend to fish, the fish that you're looking for that are picking off bits here and there, they'll be mainly feeding on terrestrials, drop-offs into the rivers. So you've got tree-lined rivers and you've just got beetles and such like falling in. And these big trout, they obviously have to feed a bit more to maintain that weight. So it's them that I tend to try and look for. As we all know, terrestrials are, the better the weather, the warmer the weather, the more the terrestrials seem to be about. We've had phenomenal black gnat falls the last few years. This year it was awful. It was way too cold. We had that easterly wind, and from what I saw, it was virtually non-existent. And from speaking to other people, we were commenting that the black gnats have really failed this year. I wasn't around enough at the end of April to see what the hawthorns were like, but certainly the black gnats were not anywhere near. I think it was about 3 years ago, we must have had 3 weeks of black gnat activity, and literally every time I was going to the river, there was just fish up all the time on the black gnats, and we had some phenomenal fishing. Just fishing a little size 16 black gnat to targeted fish. It was fantastic. That's the type of fishing I really do enjoy.
That sounds, I wouldn't disagree with you too much on that front as well. It does sound fantastic. And you mentioned some of the other hatches there as well. Have you noticed the change? Let's take the classic opener, large dark olives. Have you noticed in the time that you've been fishing that those hatches are constant, they've got worse, or are they the same?
Well, some have got better. March browns started appearing about 20 years ago. They were absent for many years in Yorkshire and large parts of Cumbria. Then suddenly we started seeing them on the wharf, and that's a regular hatch now. I actually believe I was the first person to spot them a couple of years ago in the air and took some photographs on the air. So that gets small amounts now. Some of the hatches, I used to do a lot of evening fishing when we first moved to Ilkley about 25 years ago. And I would go out on the Association Walk, which is literally about a mile down the road here. And it runs through the park in Ilkley. So it can be very busy during the day. But come 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, there's hardly anyone around. And I would go down on a summer's night and I would just be guaranteed sport. There would be falls of blue-winged olives or blue-winged olive spinners or hatches. And it was just so regular, Pete. I could go down knowing that I was going to, in certain bits, I was going to be standing there, and at 9:30, 10 o'clock, fish would start popping and there would just be fish all over the place. But I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, I noticed a change. I was going down and you were getting the odd day when it wasn't happening. You're thinking, that's odd. Now I'm going down and thinking, it's fingers crossed, hoping you are going to get some activity. And I don't know what that's down to. I fish the bits above the sewage in Ilkley, which is the bit that's been getting all the publicity with the Ilkley Clean Rivers and such like, which is Fergal Sharkey's been talking about it on some of his podcasts and things like that. So I don't know. The evening activity certainly seems to have dropped off. I used to fish on the River Ure at Massam as well until 2005. And that's a good hour and a quarter away from me. It's about 35 miles away from me. And again, on a summer's evening, the fishing was phenomenal. Used to get some great small dark olive hatches and such like there. I don't know what that's like now, but I think it is generally a lot more hit and miss these days for whatever reason. Reasons beyond me.
I know exactly where you mean on the Ure there, because I fished that 2 or 3 times, and that is a beautiful piece of water as well.
Massive.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it as a guest 2 or 3 times and had a great time there. The butchers with their pork and black pudding sausages were some of the best I've ever eaten as well. So they were very good. And it's great. I'm starting to get a sense, and I think listeners will, about your approach to fishing. Let's take it a little bit further again, though. How would you describe yourself as an angler?
Enthusiastic. Very enthusiastic. Started a long time ago, Pete. It was actually my brother Neil who, at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, he started fly fishing. We used to go on these family picnics down to Stobo in the Tweed, because we lived in Edinburgh, you can tell by the accent I'm not from Yorkshire. And Neil picked up a fly rod, which got a fiberglass fly rod with a wooden handle. I mean, I'm going back to the early 70s here, maybe even late 60s. He tied a bit of Meccano onto the end of it as a weight and had a worm on the end, but that was his fly fishing gear. And he was catching tiny trout, and he became obsessed with it to the point where he started annoying me. Every bridge he'd go over, I wonder if there's any trout in there, I wonder if there's any trout in there. And eventually I, rather than going against that, I thought I might as well join him. So I got myself some tackle and very, very quickly became very consumed with it, actually. I remember well, as a wee boy, getting Sue Burgess catalogues every year. This may be before your time. The Abu catalogues, they had Fish of the Year. The Hardy catalogues used to come out every year, and you'd get sent them in the post. And they were wonderful, wonderful publications. I've still got them all upstairs, all my Sue Burgess stuff and things like that. And I used to obsess about. I've always obsessed for some reason about big trout. It's always done something for me. Couldn't catch them, mind, when I was a nipper. Learned to cast from some sort of little pamphlet I stood in the garden and tried to cast. I actually, at the age of 10, I was doing a paper round in Edinburgh and saved up every week. Went out and bought myself a Hardy Marquis number 6, a Hardy Fiberlight, and a Hardy Jet number 6, and a Hardy Jet double taper ice blue line number 6. That was what was recommended to me by the guy in John Dixon's on Frederick Street. So I save up for weeks and weeks and weeks, bought all this expensive gear, started tying my own flies, and then knackered the whole lot by having a long level leader of 9 foot, 9.5 foot of about 2 pound breaking strain line. So I spent all this money and all the good gear and skimped on one of the most important bits. So so consequently, we used to catch my fill of salmon parr and things like that on these holidays that we went to the Tweed and Granton on Spey. We used to go every year, 1978, 1979, 1980. Is that right? 1970? Yeah, those 3 years we went. So we fished the Tweed, fished the Spey at Granton, which was, as you know, a big salmon sea trout river. Nobody was really bothered about brown trout. The old Spey Bridge. And then as we lads, myself and my brother and a couple of mates, we would catch a bus from our house in Edinburgh over to Curry and Balerno onto the Water of Leith, which is a wee stream that runs through Edinburgh, and attempt to catch a little brown trout that were there stocked. I think they even stocked it with rainbow trout criminally at the time as well. Yeah, so that continued until my dad we made a move down to Buckinghamshire, Hadnam in Buckinghamshire, which is when my dad said, "Oh, we're moving down to England." I remember sitting on the stairs in Edinburgh and crying, didn't want to move down to England. Um, so at the age of 15, we moved down to England. My brother got into coarse fishing with good few of our mates used to fish Stan and Clem and Gill. But I never really took to the coarse fishing side of things. I used to go along with them, but my heart was always into trout fishing. Neil took me a couple of times to Farmoor, I remember, pulling lures around this concrete bowl, and that just did nothing for me, Pete. I think it's always been moving water for me. So consequently, did a bit of fishing here and there with my coarse fishing friends, usually borrowing their gear because I was too tight to buy my own because I wasn't that interested. Yeah, that was it really. Went to university in 1981 to Liverpool. Came back, moved to Cambridge in about 1984 for my job, bought my first house, and then changed job and moved up to Leeds, 1991. Believe it or not, part of the reason for that was I wanted a different territory. I'm in sales, I wanted a different territory. I was sick to death covering East Anglia where I was based in Cambridge. And actually, another reason was I wanted to get back into fly fishing, and I knew that Yorkshire was a well-known hotbed of traditional fly fishing with good rivers and good streams. So, yeah, there's me, moved up to Leeds in 1991, bought a house, Billy no mates, knew nobody up there, wanted to get into fly fishing. And I didn't know how to get started again. There'd been a sort of 1978 to 12, 13 year hiatus, I suppose. I would have been about 29 at the time when I moved up there. But I'd always sort of dabbled with trout and salmon and still kept in touch with the fishing through trout and salmon. I remember there was this guy called Oliver Edwards, and he lived somewhere in Yorkshire. So God knows how I found out his telephone number through, I don't know, directory inquiries or something. So being in sales, I'm used to approaching people and introducing myself. So it was no big deal for me to phone up Oliver. And I literally phoned him up out of the blue. And I remember him saying to me, "I'm just having my tea, I'll ring you back in half an hour." So good as this word, he rang me back and I said, "Well, this is who I am. I've had this. I'm up in Yorkshire. I want to start fly fishing. I don't really know where to go." And good old Oliver, I remember he spent a good hour with me on the phone. Didn't know me from Adam. I took loads and loads of notes of where to go on the Ned, where to go on the wharf. And he told me about this club that he was in at Massam. And he advised me to get a grayling ticket, which I did do, as a means of getting a membership there. And he said, "What you need to do as well, Richard, is come along to the AGM." So I went to the AGM for 2 or 3 years. Those were in the days when there was a waiting list to get into clubs. So I went with Oliver and his friend Bernard Benson to a few AGMs, and eventually my name came up, and that's how I ended up joining Massam. And that was great, very, very enjoyable. I was there for 4 or 5 years. But in the end got disillusioned with it, Pete, because they were chucking in 150 stockfish out every 6 weeks or so. You'd literally see them come along and tipping these stockfish in, and you're catching these fish in. And at that stage I was fishing other rivers with wild fish in them, and I wanted to experience more of that. So then what happened is my good friend John Glynn gave me a book by Lawrence Catlow, who you recognise the name. It was called Once a Fly Fisher. John couldn't get on with it, but he gave it to me, and I loved the way that he wrote, his style of writing. and started reading about the rivers that he was fishing in Cumbria. And from there, developed my interest in having a look at Cumbria as a venue for fishing for trout. And that's how I ended up going up there, having a look at some of the rivers that he was fishing. And so began my love affair with the Cumbrian rivers, which have exactly what I'm looking for. They're unstocked and they've got good trout in them. I know big trout's not everyone's bag, and some people say, I'm not bothered, just want to catch fish. But I think I've always had a fascination for big trout, and therefore my travels have taken me to places like Iceland, Russia. I'll not be going back there for a while. and New Zealand. Yeah, I've been lucky to travel to a few, Poland as well, a few places in my pursuit. But that's how I came to start fly fishing, and that's how I came to start fly fishing in Cumbria, which is where I like to spend my days now when I get the opportunity.
What a beautiful story that I thoroughly enjoyed listening to, and kudos for you for phoning up Ollie Edwards. And wow, what a mentor he must have been. I've only seen him from afar and was too shy to speak to him when I saw him at shows and other occasions, and I thoroughly enjoyed the videos that he put out. I had those and then had them on DVD as well, and just loved every second of that. And it's very often the case they say don't meet your heroes, but I guess you got time to fish with him as well, and that must have been an extraordinary aid to your learning curve, and probably took you in a completely different direction into some rarefied air as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, he wrote a ton of articles for fly fishing and fly tying. And I know that myself and a lot of my friends were very, very heavily influenced by Oliver. His tyings, his writings, his fly patterns. And, we were all sort of took up nymphing and check nymphing because of what he had written. So, yeah, he definitely took us down that direction. And he was, fished with Oliver quite a few times. He was a wonderful, wonderful angler, font of knowledge, funny guy in many ways. Didn't suffer fools gladly. He came round here once when we moved to Ilkley. He came out of my house in Leeds and we moved to Ilkley. He came round here once with his wife in the car, Hazel. Now, what this was he was he started writing articles for Fly Fishing and Fly Tying about spiders and about genuine Purcell's gossamer thread on the wooden spools. And I had quite a few of these. And he said, right, I'll come round and I'll identify the best ones for you, because there was a slight variation in colour. Anyway, he turns up and I said to Catherine, I said, there's this guy, Oliver Edwards, he's turning up. And Catherine sort of knew the name and everything. Anyway, he turns up and he says, I've got Hazel in the car. So he's parked in the driveway over there. And I said, get Hazel in. And he said, no, she'll be right. So she actually sat in the car for over an hour, and I kept saying, you want to get Hazel? And he said, no, she'll be right out there like that, except in a Yorkshire accent rather than my poor attempt at a Yorkshire accent. So yeah, I kept him. She just sat in the car for an hour as he chatted away to me, and then left. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy, and obviously, sadly, no longer with us, but huge influence on guys, many guys my age, and I think fly fishers, river fly fishers in general, have a lot to thank Oliver for.
Absolutely.
Sadly missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And myself included. And like you say, I remember him talking about check nymphing and looking at putting that extra weight onto flies and shrimp patterns and all those sorts of things that he did will be passed on, I hope. And that's a lovely advert for how things used to operate. And I suppose in other respects they do now as well, that
Yeah.
the ability to reach out to people is probably easier now if they have a social media presence, that you
Yeah.
can ask people questions. And I'm sure you have the same as many others. And even myself get messages from people asking advice. And it's an absolute pleasure to speak to them. And I often, somebody at the weekend asked me about, they were coming down here, they were blown off Norway because obviously
All
that's
right.
shut and they were heading down this way and wanted help. And it's lovely to be able to phone them up and say, right, okay, this is what I suggest. And that's the good thing about our community, isn't it? That it does go on within it, and that ability to help, and the way that you were helped and treated by Oliver, I'm sure has shaped you as a fly angler as well in other aspects.
Definitely, yeah. Learned a lot from Oliver. His insights were amazing. Actually, just thinking, I was with him on the River Wharf once, well, a couple of times actually. Once in the Upper Wharf and once down at Gallagate, and I took all these photographs of him, and I ended up sending them to Mark Bowler, which he used numerous times, and every time he would use them, I would get a check in the post. just all of a sudden, this check would appear in the post. And I think it was 20 or 30 quid each time. So it ended up being a good money spinner, that one. But yeah, he was always interesting company, good at holding court, was Oliver.
Yeah,
I actually think he
fantastic.
bought me a pint once, which he was very reticent to do, to put his hand in his pocket, but he made no bones about that.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's move on a little bit. That's lovely. We've got a sense of you now as a person, as a fly angler, what has made you tick, your passion, which we're going to come on to. Let's, before that, because you're primarily targeting sizable fish, I'm guessing then as a result of that, you're pretty fastidious about tackle when it comes to rods, fly lines, leaders, flies, etc. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Um, my leaders are and lines are always. I try and keep them clean. I don't clean them after every day's fishing, but I will clean my lines to make sure that all the scum's off them. Rods have been known to throw down thinking I'll have a nice soft landing, and there's been a stone underneath, and yeah, I've chipped a few rails in my time and things like that. But yeah, generally I like to look after I do like good quality stuff, Pete. I'm not saying spending money and having an expensive rod is the be all and end all. But I do like reels. I love reels. I love black reels. I don't like blingy reels. I love the black reels. I love lambsons. I've got numerous lambsons. I'm looking at one just now. I've recently bought. I've always wanted to. I was quite interested in listening to your podcast with the guy who designed the Reddington Rise reel.
Paul,
Can't remember
yeah.
his name. And I always looked at them and thought they look quite nice. So I bought myself one of them, which I've put a 3-weight line on. That looks good as well. But yeah, I do like my good gear. I must admit, I like my rods and my reels. To rods are obviously a very, very personal thing. I don't like anything that's too stiff. Generally, I will try and get as close to trout as possible. Not always possible, especially on the upper reaches of rivers when you go gin clear. It's a bit of a trade off. You get as close as you can, but sometimes you can overcook it and you just see this tail go. But that comes with experience. Slow and sure is the way to approach some of these big fish. Well, most of the big fish. So yeah, it's I do like my rods and my lines and my reels. I haven't got any. I think with beginners, I've got a friend, Kevin, who has started fly fishing a couple of years ago, and he used to do a lot of coarse fishing when he was younger and really enjoyed it and saw the pleasure I was getting out of fly fishing. So he's taken it up, and I recommended some middle range stuff for him because I didn't see any point in him buying top of the range stuff. He's not at a stage where he would appreciate a really good rod, and a really good rod's not going to make him a better caster. So, and he's very happy with that. But I'm at the stage now where A, I can afford to buy things like this, and B, I like to have nice things. I don't have many other vices. I don't drink a lot. I drink a bit, but I don't go out tons and tons and tons. But I do like my fishing stuff.
Nice. And when it comes to fly lines, is there a brand that you like to use? Is there one that sort of ticks the box for you?
I've used Barrio GT90s for years with no complaints, but I've recently purchased two Guideline Presentation Plus fly lines, and I like them very much, the times that I've used them. So I can see myself using both in different circumstances. But there isn't any particular profile that I prefer. But there are brands, the Barrio and the Guideline brand, that I quite like at the moment. That may change.
Nice. I haven't tried the Guideline, but a shout out to Mike Barrio for everything that he's done over the years. And I've been trying to get him on here. If you're listening, Mike, I ask him every now and again if he'll come on, but he's still not so keen. But Mike, this is a public appeal. If you're interested, it would be great to have you on here at some stage. But let's geek out a little bit and talk about leaders. And what do you look for? And do you roll your own when it comes to the style of fishing that you're doing? Let's say it's dry fly, you're targeting fish. Let's think about, do you tie your own? What sort of length are you looking at? I know that can change, obviously, but as for somebody listening who's thinking about this a little bit more and wants to try this style of fishing, what would you recommend, and where should they think about starting?
Well, what if you're starting rolling your own? You mean,
or yeah, from a length and a strength, that sort of thing. And if it's a taper, are you looking for something slightly aggressive or more gentle? I'm guessing slightly less aggressive rather than that will land the fly nice and delicately.
Yeah, definitely in the less aggressive field for myself. Again, the river that I fish in Cumbria, it's not a lot of rapids. It's fairly smooth. It's big fish. It can be quite clear. So it's generally long leaders, and I do like a copolymer tippet. Generally, it is 5X, which in the tippet that I use is frog hair. I think it's about 4.7 pounds. Occasionally I'll go down to 6X. I don't like it on big fish. I remember a couple of seasons ago on the last day, I hooked and landed a fish over £3, a brown trout over £3, and it was just one of those energetic buggers that I like to play fish pretty hard. Too hard, I don't know. I don't snap off in fish. I'm very careful with knots. I check my leader before casting at what I think is a big fish. So I do try and like to play them hard, but this one particular fish was on 6X, and my heart was in my mouth. It was all over the place. It was down rapids. There was nothing I could do. I was exerting as much pressure. Every time I was getting it back in, it was shooting off again. And it was a bit sort of nerve shredding, but I did get it in, and then had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, and he said, yeah, he's exactly the same on 6X. But yeah, I would say 5X is a good standard on big trout in this country, and I do say in this country because in other countries 5X is a bit on the slim side. Russia and places like that, those fish are something else. Russia and Iceland and New Zealand are just, yeah. I've been cleaned up on tippets thicker than 5x by fish abroad. So yeah, but as I say, in this country, 5x. As long as you feel comfortable with it, the situation will dictate itself. After weeks of no rain, it could be up to 20 foot and 6x, and it could then be either a small dry fly or probably sight fish, a very small nymph, beadhead nymph. Is it 1.5 mil? Is that the smallest beadhead? 1.5 mil beadhead on size 18-20 flies on 6x. And I love that as well, Pete, because that is sight fishing. You're not just sort of chucking the nymph in and hoping someone's going to grab hold of it. You're targeting fish. You're also scaring them in those situations. But yeah, that's very exciting fishing. I do enjoy that. Very much. Can't remember what your question was now.
No, I think you've answered it perfectly, and you've taken me away. I was thinking of Italy once more, and I can't remember if I said on the podcast that that I did out there that I was following somebody up the equivalent of a spring creek that had fished a dry, and it, like you say, this ability to be able to see the fish, but with a nymph, it's in a different dimension, isn't it? And yet you're seeing, because we were fishing from the bank, that you were getting the ability to see those fish, the reaction, the nymph, and it works. I understand totally what you were saying about that it ticks that box in a slightly different way, but also a thrilling one, because you're almost seeing the chase open out in a different way, aren't you? And you see that little movement, that little dart of the fish, whatever, and it's slightly different to that rise, isn't it? But equally as exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of my fish are on dry fly that to see one move through clear water, and was it Skews that talked about that white wink underwater? To see that on a Cumbrian fish, you just see the mouth open and close, and you just you tighten, and there it is, and that is extra thrilling for me, because it's not something that I do every day, or get the opportunity to do every day. It really is a low water tactic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. No indicator, absolutely nothing, and just watch the fish. And I'd recommend to anyone, if you get the opportunity, if you don't do it very often, give it a go, because it still works. I know we love Euronymphing and some of those other techniques as well, but this still works, and it's a really thrilling way to target fish in a way that you may not have done in quite some time. So I think give it a look at some stage if you get the opportunity to. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about the mental aspects of it as well, and you're in position. Let's say that you're on one of these Cumbrian rivers, you've got the setup exactly as you want it, you think you've identified the hatch, or if you haven't, perhaps it is a terrestrial fly of some sort. What is your thought process then from that moment that you've seen that fish rise? Is it a waiting process? Are you getting yourself in position, waiting? What is the process, so that listeners can get an idea of what you're doing?
Well, sometimes that's dictated by your riparian surroundings. There might be an ideal place to cast from, but there's a bloody great big tree there, so preventing you from doing it. So sometimes you have to cast from a less than ideal position, and then I guess it's looking at the water flow, how the water's going to affect the fly when it lands. The pace of the water, the depth will dictate how far in front of that fish you're going to place the fly. So there's all sorts of variables. Every situation, I guess, is slightly different, and you take each on its own merits. So your approach to two fish is never going to be exactly the same, unless as I say, you're just fishing the water. This looks likely, and start casting a clink up and hope somebody's going to come up and grab hold of it. But I don't really tend to do that much at all. I'm not saying I never do. Occasionally, I'll just, I will do it just for the sake of doing it, but it's not what I really enjoy doing. Every fish is earned.
Absolutely, that's what I was trying. I guess I should have made myself clearer on that as well. The stalking of fish, and because we've tried through this to get people to perhaps, like you say, rather than fishing the water, sitting down, waiting, and getting yourself into position to make that cast. And I guess what I was really interested so was, right, okay, you're thinking about that pace of water. It's a relatively slow piece of water. I'm not trying to sort of sit that situation, but what I'm really interested to do is to say, right, okay, you've identified that fish. Is it going to rise a number of times? Are you waiting a number of times? But also, are you mentally preparing yourself for when that fish takes? And do you have a plan in your mind for when that fish takes, that it might go into the bank? It might do. Are you sort of playing these sorts of scenarios out in your mind about what you're going to do and how the struggle is going to play out?
Yeah. Every time, Pete. And before last season, I had a strange season last season. I haven't lost as many big fish. When I say big, I call big over £3. I haven't lost as many big fish as I did last season. It was unbelievable. I just didn't know what I was doing wrong. I was seeing them. I was, more often than not, I was getting them to eat. I was waiting the requisite time that I thought was the right time. I was hooking them. We were veering off, then the hook would ping out. It was just so frustrating. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I was beside myself. It wasn't anything to do with not finding fish. I was still finding them. I was getting them to rise. I was hooking them a lot. Well, sometimes I wasn't hooking them. I was waiting. I remember numerous times. I remember on a fish, a big fish I put over £3, casting a beetle at it, and I saw the surge of water as the beetle landed, and I knew it was going to take it. I just knew it came up, head and tailed over it. I waited, tighten, it just haired off, and then ping, fly just pinged back. And the amount of times that happened last season was unreal. There was another one. I think the start of the bad luck happened in March Brown time. There was I spotted a big fish 50, 100 yards down this smooth pool. It took ages getting into position. It was rising very, very infrequently, but every time a lone March Brown had come down over it, it would snaffle it. I got it either first or second cast. I was expecting it to come up as well. Came up, took the fly, hooked it. I thought, this is a good hook. Veered off, ran downstream, literally 5 or 10 seconds. Hook just pulled. That was a start. And then all through last season, it just happened so many times. Yet the season before, it didn't hardly happened at all. So it's very, very strange how I don't know whether it's your timing that goes, or it's just pure bad luck, or a combination of both. But this season actually started off the same. I lost a couple of big fish, but since then it's gone all right. So fingers crossed it will continue like this.
Nice. And that's part of that mental thing that I'm fascinated about, that those fish coming off, and then you're in a different mindset, aren't you, when you've made that cast, because it's semi either eating away or in the back of your head, or you're thinking, is this going to stick? Whereas when everything's going really well, it's boom, lifted into it and fish on, right, that was fantastic. But when you have that spell that it goes a little bit lean, or those fish, for whatever reason, like you say, because we often blame ourselves a lot of the time, and that's not always the right thing either, is it? That it may be something else that's happening in the water ahead of us that has made that situation slightly different. But it really interests me how we change. And I think I may have talked about it on here before. In New Zealand, it happened to me, and I had 3 days where I just kept losing fish. And then I stuck one and I ran down. I was almost neck deep in the river. I thought, I'm not, and this thing should have come off. It didn't. I landed it, and then everything changed, and you fish more relaxed, more differently. It really, to me, is an interesting way to think about your approach as well, and hence me asking that sort of thing. And it is your temperament at that time as well, isn't it? When that
Yeah,
fish is in, it is.
yeah,
I was watching some film the other day, and it was a fictional piece, but the guy about getting his heart rate down, getting his heart rate. And I know we don't have to be this because we do it for fun, but just relaxing, taking a breath, and playing it out. I guess that's what I'm trying to say with this a little bit for people listening as well, is that think about how it might happen when that fish takes, so
yeah.
that if it does happen, you're sort of semi-prepared, and it does make it a little bit easier in some respects, doesn't it?
It certainly does. If you're prepared, it it should be easier to have a successful hookup. It's those occasions where you think your cast's slightly off or quite a bit off. You think it's gone past it has gone past where you've seen the fish rise. You're thinking, right, it's not going to have that. I'll get prepared for the next cast, and all of a sudden it's followed it downstream, and it sort of takes it and takes you by surprise. There's all sorts of things that can happen, but it's very very frustrating, very frustrating. I'm fortunate that I fish in a sparsely populated by anglers uh, river, in that when that happens to me, the air can just turn absolutely blue. You've just reminded me. I was out on the river about 6 weeks ago, and I was with my friend John, and I was after this big fish that I could clearly see moving all over this pool, and it was a hard fish to pin down. In the end, I got this cast in, and I thought that's going to eat that, and it did. And I hooked it, and it veered off. It ran upstream. It was splashing around in shallow water. It ran under my bank. It was splashing under my feet, which was it was quite. I was on quite a high bank actually. John was videoing me, and it got off. Blooming fish got off, didn't it? And yeah, I just went F it on video. So it's one of those videos that I'm probably not ever going to put on social media because of the swearing. But it's just very, very frustrating when it happened. I think I must have, God, I must have been trying for that fish for a good half hour, 45 minutes, not constantly, just when I thought, right, cast now. And yeah, this cast, I put it over and I thought, yeah, it's going to have that. And it did. It did. But I didn't land it.
Yeah. Do you deal with loss? I'm getting a sense already, but how do you cope with loss? Okay, we've had that
Swear
outburst that's on
loudly.
video. Yeah, but then it's gone, is it? And then you move on to the next thing.
I don't know. I'll often text my very good friend, saying something like FFS, just lost a big trout or whatever. And yeah, no, no, I don't. I can't just get on with it. It eats away at me, because you put so much effort into these fish. You look forward to it so much. I don't have the opportunity of fishing every day through the week because of work. So, I'm always thinking about, hope the weather's going to be okay this weekend, and hoping can get up on the river this weekend. And suddenly you've got this big trout in front of you. It's what you've been thinking about all week. You've cast the fly, it's taken the fly, you've hooked it, you've played it, and it's come off. So, no, I don't take it lightly. It eats away at me, it annoys me. And does it get me down? Yeah, I think about it a long time. I do dwell on it quite a long time. Yeah, I do. I'll often go back and try and catch that same fish, but you know what it's like. They're rarely in the same place at the same time. It's all dependent on the height of the river, and other factors as well. Um, so yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. There's a big trout that I found. I've looked at this place for years and years and years and thought, it's got to be a big trout. It's got to be a big trout. Got to be a big trout there. Never seen anything rise. And then I think it was last season. It was 5 o'clock at night in the spring, and I sat there for 15 minutes, I guess. Nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, this neb broke the surface. Oh, bloody hell, I knew there'd be a big fish in here. It was rising very infrequently. I hooked it. I had the blooming thing in. I had it at my net. And then because it was so tree shrouded, my rod got caught in the trees overhead. And that was on 6X tippet as well, would you believe? And it just shook its head and the line snapped. And that, I would say that fish was 4.5 pounds, something like that. And I've every time I'm in that stretch river, I'll go back and look for it. Never seen it rise again. Yeah. But I'll get it one day.
Nice. Nice. They're the things that keep you coming back as well, aren't they? And there's a couple of things that you've been saying that have made me think about it. Again, we touch on it very occasionally, that if you are fishing in this way rather than fishing the water, I personally, as I get older, my reactions and for other reasons aren't as good as they used to be. But if I know I'm targeting a fish that I can see rising, that I reckon I've got a better chance of hitting it because I know where it's going to eat the fly rather than if I'm just fishing the water. And of course, if I'm just fishing the water, there's a chance I may put down that very, very special fish. Exactly. And then what you said about that fish that was rising infrequently, I'd love to get your take on that then, that if that fish was not rising frequently, how did you think about that? What made you decide to say, right, yes, I'm going to give it a go? And if he's gone once or twice or three times, will you leave it or will you fix up a strategy in your mind? How did you think about that particular fish? Let's take you over some painful ground, no doubt, but just to get an idea.
It was 5 o'clock at night. It was spring. I was ready to go home. So it was a sort of last chance, and I couldn't believe it was fish. It was feeding at that time, and it wasn't early spring. I would have thought it would probably be early May, maybe something like that. I'd have to have a look in my diary. I keep a diary, and I could tell by looking at my diary, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it was probably rising once every 3-4 minutes, something like that. Not a lot. I put several flies over it, but it wasn't up enough. I thought I got a good cast over it several times. Didn't take the fly. I went through a black clinkhammer and probably various other terrestrials. I ended up hooking it on a hawthorn fly, a big foam hawthorn fly, and so what I was doing was I was waiting for it to rise, and as soon as it rose, I would try and get a fly over it. It was very, very cramped, difficult, trees all around me. So it wasn't far away from me. It was probably probably say 25, 30 foot away from me. So it wasn't a difficult cast, but because of all the foliage around me, it made it a bit challenging. But I got this cast in the end, just after it had risen. I thought it's got a good chance of taking this. And it did, came up and I couldn't believe the size of it because honestly, the river here's probably 30 foot across, something like that. And this fish was a big fish, in a river that small up there. It's astonishing. But yeah, and I've been back. I told my friend about it. And I've been back several times. I've seen it rise a couple of times, but it has to have a particular push of water. The river has to be a particular height. When it's low water, you've just got absolutely no chance of getting it, no chance at all. The flow just isn't there. So, so again, I've forgotten why I've waffled on about this big fish so much. But yeah, I'll go back. I'll often go back and try for lost fish. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. But yeah, they do play on your mind, Pete. They do play on your mind.
Yeah. And something you said that was really interesting about that fish. Again, please accept my apologies for keep bringing this up, but that particular fish. But you said that he'd risen and then you cast soon after. Would I be right in thinking you're thinking, right, well, he's probably higher in the water column having just eaten something and there's a chance he'll come for it? Was that your thought process or was it something else?
It was quite... It wasn't really slow bit of water, but it was a reasonably slow bit of water, and each rise was in a different place. I'm not saying it was all over the place, but each rise was maybe 3 or 4 foot away from the one before. So just by casting and casting and casting was, to me, not a great idea. So I'd wait for it to rise and quickly try and get a fly over it. So that was the idea of waiting for this fish to rise. Otherwise, you don't know whether you're going over it or not. And it's essentially, I would think that a lot of those would be wasted casts.
Yeah, nice. That's great. I think that's a really cool tip. But thank you for sharing lots of that and your expertise. You talked about travelling and the places that it's taken you to, and there've been pretty special ones. And of course, New Zealand is hugely popular with people. Is there somewhere, though, that remains on that list that you would love to go try target fish that you haven't visited, but it's, if the opportunity arose, that you'd take it?
I've not been to lots of places. I've been to Iceland once. I've been to Russia, is it twice or 3 times? I think it's twice. Was it 3 times? Twice. Last time was in 2019. That was astonishing. Russia, just primeval, really, really strong fish. But we can write that one off for the foreseeable with Mr. Putin. And I've been to New Zealand 2014, 2016, and then January 2020. I've been 3 times. I go with my, who I'm fortunate enough to call both a friend and a fishing companion, and a good friend of yours as well, Paul Proctor. I've been fishing with Paul I've known Paul for over, we don't actually know when, I do remember when we met. It was on a grayling day on the River Hodder, and we bumped into each other, and just kept in touch and ended up going fishing, and I think very much alike. And without blowing any smoke up Paul's backside, I wouldn't be anywhere near the angler I am now if he wasn't my fishing buddy. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to travel to places like Iceland and Poland and New Zealand with Paul. Just the two of us fishing together for 3 weeks, and it's just New Zealand. What a place! What a place! We've got another trip planned. I'm going on a walking, non-fishing holiday at the end of this year with some friend, which is going to be tough. Not fishing, going to New Zealand. But Paul and I think, are going. So what's next? Next year's 2025, 2026. I think we're going to go. The two of us are going to go again. That's the plan anyway. That's the plan. And if you ask me where's your ideal destination, which I know is one of your favourite questions, it would be New Zealand. And I would say that it's so vast that I've barely scratched the surface. I've only fished in the South Island, never fished in the North Island. I do have a particular fondness for brown trout, and a particular unfondness, that's not a correct word, for rainbow trout. I just far prefer brown trout. I know a lot of people might say that's wrong, but yeah, there's something about brown trout for me that rainbow trout just don't give me. So hence, because South Island has, as you know, a lot more brown trout rivers than rainbow trout rivers, we've just concentrated on the South Island. But as I say, barely scratched the surface.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, I feel like I've been really mean because I've had to make you continually relive that magnificent fish that sadly didn't stick. And now I've got to ask you the question that is probably the most dreaded, or has become the most dreaded on here. We have, and for listeners, it's on Spotify. It's called the Fly Culture Road Trip Mix. I've remembered it because I can never remember what it's called. We've got so many songs on there. I think there's 6 hours from. I've chosen some songs, guests on the podcast, guests of the podcast who are musicians. We've got their music on there. And it's a wonderful soundtrack. If you get bored of listening to me going to the river, listen to some music as well, and that can set the tone perhaps for the day as well. But are you going to give us a song, Richard, that you would choose for us that I can put on the road trip mix?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since you asked me, and I'm going to. Well, it was between two songs. It was going to be either Strangler's Tank, but that might be a bit too much for some listeners. But I'm going to go for the Stranglers' Walk On By, their cover version of Walk On By.
That is a beauty.
If you haven't listened to it, Pete, listen to it. That is just unreal.
I will have a listen. I love the song itself anyway, and their take on it, I think, would probably be fantastic. So I will.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I will add that one very, very shortly. We've talked just over an hour, Richard, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface, but it's been wonderful to get an idea of you as a fisherman, get some advice, some help. You've been, as ever, incredibly modest, yet I've tried to bring out the skill that you clearly possess whilst on the riverbank, and hopefully listeners have learnt a little bit from that, and they've got a sense of that from you as well. So thank you for being part of our community as well. And it's been wonderful to have you along on the podcast. If people want to catch up with you, where are you on social media and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I think it's at Richard Tong 3. I'm also on Instagram. I can't remember what it is. There can't be that many Richard Tongs on Instagram. And I'm on Facebook, just under my own name. Just try to see what my thing is under Instagram. Not very good on Instagram. Yeah, I am on Instagram anyway.
Well, go search him out. Go see what he's up to. You can see, as I said in the introduction, a thinking angler. There's no doubt about that. It's been very clear from what you've said today and how you approach things. And I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to that. Thank you, Richard, so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Well, do you know what, Pete? It was a pleasure, and I can't believe that an hour seems to... I thought we'd been talking about 15, 20 minutes. I looked at the clock, and it's like an hour and 10 minutes. Just, for me, it's flown by. So, yeah, I hope it hasn't been too long for you.
Not at all. I've loved every second of it. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Okay. Cheers, Pete.
Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. As ever, we try and mix up the content, hear about people as anglers, learn a little bit along the way. And as we always say, we're always learning in this pastime. So if we get the chance to pick somebody like Richard's brain and get an idea of what he's doing, I think we're all the better for it. But as ever, there'll never be any charge for these. I just love talking about fly fishing, and hopefully there'll be some more coming along very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.